The UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter shuddered violently as it banked hard over the dense jungle canopy, its rotors carving through the humid air at 180 feet. Inside the cramped cargo bay, Staff Sergeant Josie Flores triple-checked her HK-416 assault rifle, her gloved fingers instinctively tracing the familiar contours of the weapon that had become an extension of her body over 4 brutal years in Special Forces. 90 seconds, the crew chief bellowed over the deafening rotor noise, his hand signals emphatic against the wind whipping through the open doors. Josie adjusted her night vision goggles, settled her helmet more firmly, and moved toward the starboard door where the fast rope hung coiled and ready. The jungle below stretched endlessly in every direction, a dark green nightmare of triple canopy, forest broken only by occasional clearings and the silver thread of a river catching the dying afternoon light. Somewhere down there in that hostile territory, crawling with insurgent forces, an American CIA officer was running for his life with a laptop full of intelligence that could reshape the entire war. The enemy knew it too, which is why they had thrown every available fighter into the hunt. The mission brief had been brutally simple. Fast rope insertion, locate the operative, secure the intelligence, extract before nightfall. 5 operators, 70 kilometers of enemy-controlled jungle, and maybe 4 hours of daylight left. Simple on paper. Suicide in reality. Josie gripped the rope, her HK-416 slung tight across her chest, adrenaline beginning to override the pre-combat calm. Around her, the other 4 members of her team made final checks. Master Sergeant Alex Rivera, their team leader, caught her eye and nodded once, the silent communication of operators who had worked together long enough that words became redundant. The helicopter flared hard, nose pulling up, the pilot fighting the aircraft into position over their insertion point. Through her night vision goggles, Josie could see the landing zone, a postage stamp clearing surrounded by jungle so thick it looked solid from above. Josie did not hesitate. The instant the crew chief gave the signal, she grabbed the thick nylon rope and stepped into empty air. The ground rushed up as she rappelled through 80 feet of nothing, rope burning through her gloves despite the controlled descent. Her HK-416 bouncing against her plate carrier with each twist of the rope. She hit the ground in a tactical crouch, weapon immediately coming up to cover her designated sector to the east, where the jungle pressed thickest against the clearing. 3 seconds later, Master Sergeant Rivera landed beside her with barely a sound. Then came Staff Sergeant Michael Lawson, their communications specialist, followed by Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, their weapons expert, and finally Staff Sergeant Jason Williams, their combat medic. The Blackhawk was already climbing away, its rotor wash flattening the elephant, grasped before the sound faded into the jungle's oppressive silence within 30 seconds. They were alone in enemy territory with nothing but their training, their weapons, and each other. Rivera ordered Josie on point and Santos on rear security, and the team pushed forward into the jungle. The German-engineered HK-416 was perfect for this environment. Compact enough to maneuver through dense vegetation, reliable enough to function in the worst conditions, accurate enough to make shots that mattered. They moved in tactical column with 7 meters between each operator, weapons covering overlapping sectors, every sense dialed to maximum. This was enemy territory, controlled by a well-organized insurgent force that had been operating here for years, knew every trail and ambush point, and had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. Americans. Lawson monitored the encrypted beacon there. CIA operative was supposed to be carrying and reported that the signal was active, bearing northeast at 1.8 kilometers, but stationary for the last 30 minutes. Santos suggested he might be hiding. Josie countered that he could be walking into an ambush and said they would not know until they had eyes on him. They pushed deeper into the jungle, navigating terrain that seemed designed to kill soldiers. Roots hidden under leaf litter waited to trip the unwary. Mud sucked at boots with every step. Thorned vines caught on equipment and uniforms. The canopy overhead was so dense that even in the afternoon, the jungle floor existed in perpetual twilight. Josie read the environment like a language she had learned to speak fluently. The way certain plants grew indicated water sources. The absence of birds suggested recent human activity. The subtle trails through undergrowth revealed where animals or people moved regularly. Her HK-416 tracked with her eyes, muzzle following her line of sight with practiced synchronization. 30 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. 6 more magazines in her kit, 210 rounds total. She raised her fist in the tactical signal for stop when she spotted a piece of fabric, caught on a branch about 15 meters ahead. Light tan, like the color of civilian clothes that someone trying to blend into rural areas might wear. The team froze instantly, each operator dropping into firing positions. As Josie moved forward with Santos providing overwatch, the fabric resolved into a piece of khaki shirt, torn and caught on thorns. It was fresh with no weathering and still carrying the manufactured smell of something worn within the last few hours. Dark stains confirmed blood, and the trail of disturbed vegetation and partial boot prints continued northeast, marked by Western-style boots moving fast without any attention to noise discipline. Whoever this was, they had been running scared. They pushed on, following the increasingly erratic trail their CIA operative had left. Broken branches at shoulder height, scuffed earth, disturbed leaf litter that practically announced someone had passed through. The operative was either too panicked or too injured to care about tradecraft. Places where he had fallen were marked by handprints in the mud, more blood on leaves and bark. Signs of someone reaching the absolute limits of physical endurance. Lawson reported that the beacon signal was growing stronger and they were within 400 meters. Still stationary. That was when Josie heard them. Voices speaking in the local dialect, multiple sources coming from directly ahead, maybe 75 meters. She raised her fist immediately and the team froze mid-step. Rivera ordered them off the trail and into concealment positions with total silence. The team melted into the jungle with the practiced efficiency of ghosts, each operator finding positions that broke up their human outlines and provided both concealment and cover through gaps in the vegetation. Josie caught glimpses of movement. Insurgent fighters, maybe 8 of them, spread around a small clearing, armed with a mix of AK-47s, SKS rifles, and at least 1 PKM machine gun. It was a professional loadout, not the random collection of weapons that poorly trained militias carried. And in the center of the clearing, tied to a tree with his hands behind his back, was a white male in civilian clothes matching the description of their CIA operative. He was in his late 30s, athletic build, his khaki clothing torn and blood-stained, his face bruised and swollen from what looked like a recent beating. Lawson confirmed the identification from a photo on his tablet. CIA Officer Daniel Kramer, operating undercover as an agricultural consultant. He was the package. Rivera was silent for a long moment, running tactical calculations. 8 armed insurgents with good positions and a crew-served weapon versus 5 Special Forces operators. The math could work in their favor with superior training, surprise, and better weapons, but it would be loud, violent, and risky. Rivera made the call. They were not leaving him behind, but they would do it smart. Santos would take the PKM gunner with her first shot before they even knew the Americans were there. Josie would take out the insurgent who appeared to be giving orders, disrupting their command structure. Williams would move immediately to secure Kramer the second shooting started, cut him loose, and assess his medical condition. Rivera and Lawson would take the center mass of the formation with maximum violence and minimum time. They spent the next 5 minutes, moving into optimal firing positions. Each operator finding angles that maximize their fields of fire while minimizing their own exposure. Professional work, the kind that came from hundreds of hours of training and real-world operations where mistakes meant death. Josie settled into her position with her HK-416 stock welded to her shoulder, breathing controlled, crosshairs on the insurgent leader's chest. At this range, maybe 60 meters, the 5.56mm round would have plenty of velocity and energy. Rivera gave the count, and on his mark, Josie's HK-416 cracked twice in rapid succession, a double tap to center mass. The insurgent leader went down instantly. Santos's first round took the PKM gunner in the head with clinical precision that, eliminated their most dangerous weapon before he could bring it to bear. The jungle exploded into chaos. Rivera and Lawson poured controlled fire into the center of the insurgent formation, their weapons working in deadly synchronization. 2 insurgents went down in the first 3 seconds. A third was wounded and crawling for cover. Williams was already moving, sprinting through the kill zone toward Kramer with his knife out to cut the CIA officer's restraints. The surviving insurgents scattered, returning fire wildly in multiple directions. Not yet having identified where the Americans actually were, Josie transitioned to her next target, an insurgent bringing his AK up toward where Williams was cutting Kramer loose. Her fingers squeezed smoothly, the AK-416 barked once, and the man's weapon clattered from dead hands before he could fire. Williams called over comms that the package was mobile, multiple injuries but able to move, and that they needed an extraction route immediately. Rivera ordered a bound withdrawal, alternating cover, with Josie and Santos taking the first bound. Josie was already moving, keeping low, using terrain and vegetation for concealment, her weapon up and ready. Rivera and Lawson maintained suppressive fire, laying down controlled bursts that kept insurgent heads down and prevented organized pursuit. They executed textbook bounding overwatch, one element always moving while another provided covering fire, constantly maintaining pressure on the enemy while creating distance from the danger area. Williams had Kramer up and moving, half-dragging the CIA officer who looked like he had been through hell but remained conscious and mobile. Then Lawson called contact on the left flank, at least 4 more hostiles moving to cut them off. The jungle erupted with gunfire again. For every insurgent they dropped, 2 more appeared, drawn by the sound of the fighting. This was their territory, their home ground, and they had numbers on their side. Santos called for them to break contact, her voice tight but controlled as she dropped her second magazine and slammed in a fresh one. They were burning through ammunition and the enemy was not stopping. Rivera decided to push past their planned rally point and head northeast to the river, calling an extraction there instead. It added 2 kilometers to their route, but it was unexpected, and the enemy could not have been told about it because they had only just decided. Lawson called in the new extraction point and requested the helicopter in 90 minutes, advising that they would be hot. They pushed through the jungle at a pace that would have been reckless in training. Santos suddenly shouted a warning and an RPG screamed through the jungle, impacting a tree 15 meters behind their position and exploding with enough concussive force to knock Josie sideways. Shrapnel tore through vegetation, some of it pinging off her body armor. Her ears rang from the blast, but she kept moving, kept her weapon up, kept scanning for threats. You did not stop when things went wrong. That was when discipline and training mattered most. The river appeared through breaks in the jungle canopy, a brown ribbon maybe 40 meters across, flowing fast with recent rains. Rivera designated a spot where the riverbank formed a natural fighting position and they collapsed into defensive positions, each operator covering a sector with weapons oriented outward and Kramer placed in the center while Williams worked on his injuries. The assessment was grim. Broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, definite concussion, multiple lacerations, signs of a systematic beating. He was functional but needed a hospital soon. Lawson reported the Black Hawk was 70 minutes out. 70 minutes was a long time to hold, a position when the enemy knew where you were and had superior numbers. Josie called contact almost immediately as an enemy force of at least a dozen fighters approached from the west, moving in coordinated pairs with proper cover and concealment. Her HK-416 barked in controlled bursts. Then Santos screamed a warning about another RPG, the rocket screaming over their position and missing by maybe 10 meters, before impacting the river with a massive geyser of water. Josie spotted the RPG team reloading behind a fallen log about 70 meters out, steadied her breathing, and put her crosshairs on the loader's visible shoulder. The HK-416 cracked once, and the loader dropped the rocket and fell sideways. A second shot caught the gunner in the side. She dropped her empty magazine and slammed in a fresh one. 3 magazines left. 60 rounds. Lawson called movement on the river. 2 small boats were racing upstream, each mounting heavy machine guns and carrying additional fighters who could land behind their position. Santos shifted fire to the lead boat, her rounds catching the operator and sending the vessel veering into the riverbank. But the second boat kept coming, its machine gun opening up with heavy caliber fire that tore chunks out of the trees around their position. Lawson called that his HK-416's bolt had locked back on an empty chamber and he was switching to his sidearm. "How long on the helicopter?" Rivera demanded. 40 minutes. Josie had maybe 20 rounds left. The enemy had them outnumbered and was slowly tightening the noose. That was when the cavalry arrived. The roar of jet engines split the jungle air, massive and sudden and beautiful. An FA-18 Super Hornet streaked overhead at maybe 500 feet, followed seconds later by its wingmen. Lawson was on the radio instantly, calling in their position and requesting immediate air support. The lead pilot confirmed visual on their infrared marker and asked to confirm ordnance on targets to the west. Rivera gave the order. The FA-18s banked hard and unleashed hell. The 20-millimeter cannon fire sounded like the sky was tearing in half, hundreds of rounds per second impacting the jungle to their west. Trees exploded into splinters. Earth erupted in massive furrows. Insurgent fighters simply ceased to exist under that volume of fire. The fighters who had been pressing the attack suddenly broke and ran, scrambling away from the apocalyptic destruction. Santos immediately engaged the second riverboat, her rounds catching the operator and sending that vessel aground as well. The FA-18s made another pass with rockets that impacted along the tree line, and then the jungle fell abruptly silent except for the fading roar of jet engines. Everyone sounded off as good. Kramer was stable. Rivera ordered them to stay sharp while they waited on the bird. 25 minutes later, the sound of helicopter rotors in the distance brought everyone's attention around. The Black Hawk was approaching low and fast. Rivera ordered Josie and Santos onto the helicopter first with Kramer while Lawson and Williams provided security until everyone was loaded. The Black Hawk flared over the river, rotor wash whipping up spray, then pivoted to put its open door facing their position. The crew chief was all ready, scanning for threats, and the door gunners. Minigun was ready. Josie broke from her position and sprinted the 15 meters to the helicopter with Santos right behind her and Williams half carrying Kramer between them. Hans grabbed her vest and hauled her aboard. She immediately moved to the far side, her HK-416 oriented outward to provide covering fire if needed. Rivera, Lawson, and Williams broke from their positions in a coordinated sprint. The jungle erupted with gunfire again as a new insurgent force opened up from multiple positions. Rounds snapped through the air and impacted the helicopter's armored skin. Josie's weapon engaged targets even with less than 15 rounds remaining. The door gunner's minigun opened up with its distinctive buzzsaw sound, shredding the jungle at thousands of rounds per minute, and one of the FA-18s dove low over the tree line to add to the intimidation. Rivera literally dove through the door. Lawson was right behind him. Williams made his final sprint and leaped aboard. The instant they cleared the door, the crew chief was shouting to go, and the pilot was already pulling pitch, the Black Hawk clawing for altitude. Rounds continued to impact the aircraft as it climbed, but they were rising faster than the insurgents could adjust their aim. Everyone sounded off as good. Kramer was stable. The Black Hawk banked hard, heading west toward friendly territory with the FA-18s maintaining protective escort. Below, the jungle stretched out endlessly, hiding its secrets, its dead, its lessons learned in blood and bullets. Josie slumped against the cargo bay wall, letting her HK-416 rest across her lap, bolt locked back on an empty chamber. The weapon had performed flawlessly throughout the entire operation. Hundreds of rounds fired without a single malfunction. Rivera told her that dropping the RPG team had saved Williams, calling it exceptional shooting under pressure. She told him she was just doing her job. He said all of them had performed exceptionally, that the mission had gone sideways from the start, that they had expected to find their man hiding and instead found him captured, that they had gotten into sustained firefights and burned through nearly all their ammunition, but that they had adapted, improvised, and accomplished the mission. That was what Special Forces operators did. The forward operating base appeared on the horizon. The Blackhawk settled onto the landing pad, and medical personnel rushed forward with stretchers for Kramer while intelligence officers waited nearby for the laptop. Rivera ordered weapons to the armory, gear to the team room, medical checks for everyone, and debrief at 1900 hours. They climbed out of the helicopter, legs stiff and bodies aching but alive. Kramer managed a weak thumbs up as they carried him away on a stretcher. That evening the debrief was thorough. A conservative estimate put enemy casualties at 30 to 40 killed in action. Effectively 2 reinforced squads destroyed. When Santos said the airstrikes had done most of it, the intelligence officer corrected her, pointing out that if the team had broken and run when first engaged, the enemy would have overrun them before air support could respond. Rivera said simply that breaking and running was not what Special Forces operators did. Later, back in her quarters, Josie pulled out her maintenance kit and gave her HK-416 one more detailed cleaning. It was ritual more than necessity, the familiar motions, the smell of gun oil, the satisfaction of knowing her primary tool was in perfect condition. The weapon had saved her life more times than she could count. It had never failed her, never malfunctioned at a critical moment, never given her reason to doubt its reliability. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rivera. Team meeting at 0800 tomorrow. New operation being briefed. Pack for extended deployment. She typed back that she was ready when needed, set the phone aside, and closed her eyes. Somewhere out there, another impossible mission was waiting. Another helicopter would need boarding. Another hostile territory would need infiltrating. And when that call came, she would be ready, her weapon would be ready, and her team would be ready because they were Special Forces operators. They did what others could not. They went where others would not. They succeeded when failure seemed certain, and then they came home, maintained their gear, and prepared to do it all over again. That was the job, and Josie Flores would not have traded it for anything in the world.